The BMW R1250 GS is a very popular bike, and in some cases it's viewed as the king of the adventure bikes. And a lot of people would say it's an excellent bike. As good a bike this is it really suitable for you? Hi, my name is Matt. Welcome to Roads of Oz, and on this episode we're looking at BMW's R1250 GS, and we're going to give you a few reasons why you should get it and just as many reasons why you shouldn't. The BMW R1250 GS was produced between 2019 and 2023 and had a massive range of options, and BMW loves their optioned up bikes, and there are many different editions. Problem is, you need to be well aware of what edition has what feature. Best thing you can do is write down a list of all the things you want and make sure that they're on that bike. Because BMW has so many options and packages out there, there's bound to be one that will suit you. So take your time and make sure you find the bike with everything that you find important on it. The one thing they all have, this 1254cc Boxer twin, and they know how to do this. They've been doing it for years. This one, it cracks out 100 kilowatts at 7,750 RPM, and more importantly, 143 Newton meters at 6,250 RPMs. So what does that mean? Well, you've got more than enough power for a bike this size. It absolutely hoots, and the engine is very responsive, the fuel injection, it all works well together. Outside of the motor, well, apart from the telelever front suspension and the 7-inch TFT display, everything else is, they're all different options. Some things you do get on the bike, some things you don't. Like I said earlier, definitely check it out and make sure you have the bike you're interested in has all the options you want, because if it doesn't, there's bound to be another one out there. What this one does have, and it's my favorite thing, is the dynamic ESA suspension. Now it's fully automatic, it self-levels. When you set it up in road mode, it is the softest, most plush suspension, and this is the bike that replaced my Moto Guzzi Grisso when I thought nothing would replace that bike. That's how good this suspension was. Now I leave it in road mode 99% of the time because it is just so comfortable. You can do multiple days on this bike and you're not feeling fatigued. As a matter of fact, when I was down in Tassie recently, I hurt my back on day 2 and I was still able to ride this bike. Most of my other bikes, the jolting from the suspension would make my back even worse. This was not a problem. The hardest bit was getting on and off. Once you're on and riding, that suspension soaked up bumps beautifully, and it is still one of my favorite things about this bike. I just can't emphasize how good this suspension is. Another thing these bikes have in their favor is they're hugely popular, and with hugely popular bikes comes a massive amount of aftermarket accessories. You don't have to go through BMW to get things like top boxes and touring screens, things like that. You have that many options out there. These bikes are beautifully supported by a whole range of manufacturers. For example, this is a Hepco & Becker Exceed top box. The front screen is a Puge screen, and you'll also find Lone Rider has panniers specific to these models. They're not a generic fit, they are designed specifically for your R1250 GS, which that gives you an idea of how popular these bikes are. The electronics package on this one is fantastic. The TFT screen and the controls to operate and navigate through the screen are very simple. Now I didn't think I'd be a fan of the little dial on the left hand to navigate through the menu, but it's quite easy to pick up and you don't need a science degree to set these bikes up how you want them. So before I go in and talk too much about the negatives, there is one thing I want to make clear. By the time you spec other bikes up, by the time you spec them up to the same level as the BMW, they are about the same price or even more, and factoring KTM's 1290, and it will go well past the BMW in some cases by the time you spec it to how you want it. Yep, my BMW is the Rallye Edition. Now, one of the things you need to know, editions can change. For example, the Rallye Edition here in Australia, the 2020 model is totally different to the 2022 model. One case I had when I ordered the Hepco & Becker top box, I ordered it for the Rallye pack, yet the mounting bracket was totally different because it was for a 21 model. You need to order the top box for a GSA, which is weird, but it makes sense because the GSA's got all the crash protection around the back that you can put your soft panniers on, and my Rallye Edition was no different. Anyway, onto the negatives. Now, as I said earlier, BMW, it's viewed as a premium product, but they are starting to creep in some things that I would say look cheap on it. And one of those examples is the rear rack that come with the Rallye Edition. Now, on the frame of the BMW, the welding on that is top notch. It looks precision, it looks so neat. But then when you get to the crash protection, the welds look like the work experience kid had a crack at it with a stick welder, and they just look cheap. Earlier the BMWs come out with Brembo brakes, now they come out with the Haynes, which is an American brake. They use the same brake pads, and the dealerships will tell you they're the same brake, but having had a bike with Brembo brakes, these ones feel a touch softer than what the Brembos just felt like they had more bite on them. It could come down to the weight, but it just seemed cheap to me. Especially when they got the Brembo rear, but they've got the Haynes front. It just makes no sense. But my guess is the accountants are starting to take over and they're looking for a way to make things a bit cheaper. Now, one thing that really bugs me, and it looks like it's happening in all BMW models, is you only get one key fob and also a backup key with an RFID. To me, that's really cheap. You really should have two key fobs, especially on a premium product. So yeah, lift your game on that one, BMW. Start supplying two of these. Now, another thing, I know BMW says it's a premium product, but paying $380 for a different foot peg mount, because I wanted to put hard panniers on. If you've got the crash protection or the soft pannier mounts on the back, the rear foot peg is different to if you had the hard panniers. They're a totally different foot peg, as you can see here, and they were 380 bucks. Ouch, for a bit of metal. It's just a bit steep, and BMW pricing can be a bit exy, but luckily for BMW, there are so many aftermarket parts out there. In most cases, you can just go that. BMW have an app. And in theory, this app should be brilliant. In design it is. I love how you're able to set up the map and it actually gives you the directions on your TFT. You don't need the phone in view. Problem with that app is it has a tendency to crash. The mapping is just terrible. It tends to take you the long way, even though you specified the fastest route. I've had instances where it won't connect to the bike, and I know that's a Bluetooth issue, but not only that, I've been riding it and had the app actually crash while using it. And that's a bit of a pain. You've got to stop the bike, start it again, and it really shouldn't happen. And luckily for BMW, let's not beat around the bush here, BMWs are generally for older riders. If they were aimed at a younger crowd, this app would be crucified. So BMW needs to really lift their game on that if they want to appeal to a younger generation. And it's a shame because in design it's great, but in execution it is horrible. To its defense, it has some really cool features, like it gives you a lean angle and some fun stuff like that. It maps your rides, which I absolutely love. But if you can't rely on it, what's the point? It needs a bit more work. So that's something BMW can fix quite easily because it's the app. It can be done in-house and can be rolled out with a minimum of fuss. All right, so one of my theories is the connected cradle for the phone is $500 to $700, where the Navigator 6 is over $1,000. The cynic in me seems to think that they're pushing it to a Navigator 6 over the phone app, but in all honesty, I think they're kicking an own goal because a lot of people had just fitted a quad lock system and just use Waze. That's a much cheaper option. So one of the biggest issue this bike has is the carbon shaft drive. And in my opinion, the amount of power bikes are putting out now, the shaft drives are going to start to really struggle managing this power, and that's been the case with the BMW. Mine was recalled before I even picked it up, but then they done the recall. It was a software upgrade. All it was to stop people when they hit jumps at 80 kilometers an hour, the bike goes through the air, the wheel spins a lot faster, so it's spinning at say 120, 130. When it lands, that force had to go somewhere, even though the bike was still only doing 80 kilometers an hour. It was damaging the drivetrain somewhere, I can't remember where, but it was doing a lot of damage. So it was a simple software fix. When the bike detects it's flying through the air, it just cuts the power enough so it's not going to do that damage. Now, don't know too many people that do 80 kilometers off jumps on these things, but in my opinion, hats off to them. That's pretty cool. And speaking of the shaft drive, they know it's an issue. Now, it's one of those things no one wants to admit, especially at BMW, but the forums say otherwise. And not only that, if you get your bike serviced through BMW, they've actually added a bit of paperwork in. They actually replaced that shaft drive at 60,000 kilometers, and they're doing more regular inspections on it. Something that wasn't originally in the service schedule. So they're admitted to it without admitting to it, but they're fixing it. But problem is, if you're not getting your bike serviced through BMW, you could be missing out on that. So my advice is, BMW have a service package. You can pay for a 3-year or a 5-year service plan. In my opinion, they're excellent value. Not only that, they're adding in some extra services when there's problems arises. A lot of these bikes are still under warranty. If the bike was purchased after 2023, it's got a 5-year warranty. Before 2023, it's got a 3-year warranty. So a lot of these bikes still have the balance of the bike warranty. All right, so what are these bikes like to ride? Well, believe the hype, they're amazing, but we're going to touch on a few of the not so amazing things first. Now, one of the minor things when you first get these bikes, if you're not used to a boxer motor, you've got to be careful when reversing it. Sometimes the cylinders will whack into your shins. Now, it took me, after a few smacks to my shins, I finally figured it out, so I'm getting a lot better at backing the bike up, but you can't take the big lunges you used to, because if you do, you're going to whack your shin. At the end of the day, it is a big bike, and they are a bit hard to maneuver around, especially if you're a smaller person. You've got the weight of the bike working against you, and due to its size and weight, it can be intimidating. But once you get going, it is as brilliant as everyone says they are. The electronic suspension on mine really makes the bike. Now, I leave mine on road mode most of the time. There is dynamic mode, which hardens up the suspension and gives the motor a bit more punch. It's brilliant, but more often than not, road mode is more than enough for me. Now, off-road, as you know, these bikes are an adventure bike. You can take them on a dirt road, no drama. The single trail, you'd have to be brave. Not my deal. I'm not really into that for these bikes. I don't need to be smashing it around where a little 125 would be more appropriate. The roads, it's amazing. It just chews up the miles, no problem. The seating position and where your hands are, where everything is great. In my case, I'd get some handlebar risers for mine just to make that a little bit more comfortable, but it's not that bad yet that I need them, but I will, that is one upgrade I will do eventually. Now, throwing it into bends, you've got to remember, it is a big bike, but it handles the bends beautifully. You can hook it into corners, no dramas at all. Just don't expect it to brake the way a much smaller sports bike would, but still it will put the wind up your average sports bike rider. They are great in the corners, and because it has all the telemetry on it, it performs beautifully and it's not overly intrusive. I hear people whinging about all these rider aids and how they're terrible. They're only terrible if you're engaging them. If you're riding properly, you shouldn't be engaging them. So there's that. But each to their own. Everyone's got their own riding style. But really loved how it rides. You can ride multiple days on this and just get up and get back on it. It is really good. Look, I was torn putting this part in the negatives. The quick shifter on boxes, let's be honest, they're rubbish. They're not as good as what you find on the Triumphs and even BMW's 4-cylinder range. That quick shifter is amazing, but on the boxes, they just don't seem to gel properly. It's not great, but on the upside is you can be using cruise control and you can shift up gears and the cruise control won't cut out. There are so many bikes out there with much better quick shifters, but it'll do the job. Just don't expect it to be as buttery smooth as some of the other brands out there. The funny thing with BMW is they're great bikes, and I'm not disputing that. Mine's amazing. I'm going on a big multi-day trip, taking the BMW. The roads are terrible, I'm taking the BMW. But problem BMW has is a bit of a legacy issue. Now the problem, people coming from Harleys, Ducatis and similar bikes like that, you don't build up the same connection with it. And I know it's a weird complaint. Like my Moto Guzzi, I gelled with that. I love that bike. You look back at it, you don't do this with the BMW. And even though it's superior every way, it doesn't make you smile the same way your Harley did or your Ducati did. So that's something you've got to keep in mind, because what happens is you buy these bikes to start with and they're perfect, but you just don't get that same, you don't get the same feels riding it. And it's a shame. It's not the bike's fault. It's really first world problems if you think about it, but you don't have that connection. Now, another thing I'm going to say, and this is a bit unpopular, they are not the perfect bike for everyone. The reason I'm saying this is they're a big bike, so they can be intimidating when you're stopping and starting. If you're in an off-road environment and if you can't get your feet down easily, it can be intimidating. Now, before you start saying, but Jocelyn Snow's only 4 foot tall, two things. One, Jocelyn Snow is a legend and she rides that bike every day. Two, you do not. The typical rider probably only rides about once a week. If they're lucky, maybe once a fortnight. That is not enough time to build up competency on these bikes or comfort on these bikes. And if you're not comfortable on it, riding it once every 2 weeks, you're not going to improve as much, and more importantly, you're going to ride it less because it's going to come across as a bit of a struggle. You're not going to be comfortable. You're not going to do the things you pictured yourself doing, like going down a dirt track or taking it on a big trip. And that's the problem these bikes have. They can be intimidating to ride, especially if you're a bit shorter. These things are quite a tall bike. Great for tall riders like myself, but if you're a bit shorter, it is a bit of extra work. So one of the things I'd recommend when buying one of these, if you don't feel confident riding it after a while, go and do a course. There's some excellent adventure bike courses that will give you more confidence and show you some of the tricks on how to get the most out of one of these vehicles. BMW will never sound as good as a Ducati, it will never sound as good as a Moto Guzzi or a Harley for that fact. They've got their own unique sounds, and a unique BMW Boxer sound, just not ringing the same bells as those other brands I just mentioned. So if you're after a bike that you want to do big miles on, you want to do a bit of dirt, you want to do pretty much everything, and you want a bike that does everything very well, you definitely can't go past the BMW R1250 GS, and that's why I ended up with one. But in an ideal world, yeah, you definitely still have that hero bike like your Ducati or your Harley Davidson, and that would be your fun bike to get around in, and for everything else, you'd be taking the GS. Let me know in the comments, have you had one of these bikes and what was your experience? Did you go back to your Italian bikes or your American bike, or did you just stick to BMW the whole way? Thanks very much for watching, and if you like this review, check out some other reviews just here.